Well, it is February 22nd, 2022. And if you write that down as a date, it'll be 22222. And today, we are going to be asking what's in a number, especially the numbers 2 and 22. Confused? You won't be if you listen to this episode of Locked On MLB.
You are Locked On MLB. Your daily MLB podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans. Welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. Thanks so much for making us your first listeners. We're available on all your free podcasting catchers. Hey, you can follow us on Twitter and on Instagram at Locked On MLB Pods. You can also follow me. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter. Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. So look there's not much to report. They met again for a couple hours. The lockout's still going on. Pitchers and catchers still haven't reported. I still feel little bits of positivity because if they're at least talking and we know what the issues are, then maybe something can happen. There's nothing more to rehash on that. I could just say, I could just say, just listen to the episode I did before and the one before that. So I decided to have, a little bit of a scavenger hunt for me on today's episode. And I got to give credit where credit is due. The idea of today's podcast basically came from our dear friend from Locked On MLB Prospects, who we will be talking, and heck. Well, why don't I just promote him right now? That Locked On MLB Prospects is hosted by Lindsey Crosby, who's been on the show. He's also host of the Braves podcast, and he had thrown an idea out in one of our little groups that we have for Locked On hosts about the best number twos and number 22s in the history of Major League Baseball. And I thought long and hard about it. I thought that would be an interesting idea because when are we going to have a date like 2/22/22 again? You know what? It's not going to be until March. No, it's going to be March 33rd, 3033. But do you know what? There's not March 33rd. That just occurred to me. Just like there's no March 44th. So the next time we're going to have this sort of symmetry on the date, 2/22, I guess when 3, I guess March 3rd. I don't you understand 2/22/22 is an interesting sounding date. And it brings up the twos and the 22s. And the fact of the matter is when you think about some of the great numbers, like some immediately jump out to mind. 44, you have Hank Aaron and you have Reggie Jackson, 24 with Willie Mays, 3 with Babe Ruth, 9 with Ted Williams. There's some that just sort of jump out at you immediately. 2 is obviously a single digit number, usually reserved for stars, right? Or fast utility infielders for some reason get it. Um, 22, you would think would be the number of like a big slugger or maybe a star pitcher. But going through this, there are some teams that really didn't have a really great 2 or 22 in their history. And some teams it was really hard to find anyone even worth noting who wore those uniform numbers. And you come to think about like who was the greatest number 2s in baseball history. And this is, by the way, coming from a native New Englander, someone who grew up on the Red Sox, who was in New York when the whole Red Sox Yankee rivalry hit a fever pitch between 2003 and 2005. All those things are true. With that in mind, Derek Jeter is probably the greatest number 2 in the history of baseball, the greatest player to wear number 2. Not just the greatest Yankee, just the greatest player, period, to wear number 2. Uh, that takes a lot out of me to admit that, but I can't. When I go through some of the list of some of these other great players, you're hard pressed to find someone better than him. I mean, the only other 2 Hall of Famers who primarily wore number 2 were Charlie Gehringer of the Tigers and Nellie Fox of the White Sox. Both great players, both with their numbers retired. Both are going to be on this list of the greatest 2s. But I picked Jeter over those 2 guys. Jeter is one of the best offensive players in the history of the New York Yankees. And when you think about what that roster means, that all-time roster with the Yankees, I would put Jeter ahead of DiMaggio in the history of the Yankees, at least in terms of longevity and getting to those 3,000 hits. So, yeah, Jeter is the greatest number 2 in the history of baseball. And the man who grew up a huge Red Sox fan feels like number 2 saying that. I'll just say that. Number 22 is interesting because going through this, there were a lot of star pitchers who wore number 22. In fact, the 2 greatest 22s in the history of baseball, both are ace pitchers, and both are arguably the best pitcher of their generation, arguably. Jim Palmer of the Blue Jays, of the Orioles. Sorry, just truth be told, as I'm recording this, I do have my screen up and I have some information that I use as notes. And I happened to glance over and I saw Toronto Blue Jays, and I said that. So forgive me. Yes, I'm well aware that Jim Palmer played for the Baltimore Orioles, and he wore number 22. And Clayton Kershaw wore number 22. Clayton Kershaw, who could be argued to be the greatest Los Angeles Dodger in team history. I think when you look back at the history of the Dodgers, you think also about not just statistics, but in terms of the impact they had on the team. So the greatest Brooklyn Dodger would be Jackie Robinson. The greatest Los Angeles Dodger would be Sandy Koufax. Ironically, Sandy Koufax was from Brooklyn and Jackie Robinson grew up in Los Angeles, but I digress. But in terms of a long-term career, Clayton Kershaw had a much longer career than Sandy Koufax and was better statistically than any Los Angeles Dodger in history. The Dodgers don't have a lot of great offensive players who played their prime with the Dodgers. So the 3 greatest Los Angeles Dodgers in history statistically would probably be Kershaw, Koufax, and Drysdale. And Kershaw wears number 22. So when we say the greatest 2 of all time is Jeter, the greatest 22, it's a coin toss between Kershaw and Palmer, in my opinion. Maybe I'll say Palmer, but you know what? I don't know. Palmer had an incredibly long career, was relevant in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, won multiple Cy Young Awards. Clayton Kershaw won multiple Cy Young Awards and was relevant in 3 different decades. And people point to some of his postseason failures, but he's also had some postseason successes as well, and walked away with a World Series ring for his troubles. So, there's nothing left to criticize Clayton Kershaw about. And so there you go. The 3 best players to wear either 2 or 22 would be Derek Jeter, Jim Palmer, and Clayton Kershaw. Now, what does that mean for other teams, though? Those are maybe the greatest of all time, but what about for your team? What about for the team that you follow? Well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to break it down. We're going to pop the hood and we're going to tinker with this whole topic that was brought to us. Kind of like when I tinker with my car, whenever I need to do something with my car, I contact Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing number of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questions and wait for the person behind the counter to order the parts on their computer, choosing only the brand the warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. Save time and money when using Rock Auto, which is a family business which is designed to save you money. And they've got everything you need, from tail lights to brake parts, motor oil, even a new carpet. Explore their new website today that's easy to navigate to find the solution for your auto parts need. Go to rockauto.com and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need are at rockauto.com. Now let's talk a little bit about Built Bar. You know what? This is the time of the year which a lot of us have given up on our New Year's resolution, but not this guy and not this year. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not really a resolution because I love eating them. Have you tried the Puffs? If you haven't, you're missing out on one of the best Built Bar tastes ever. They're the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy. There's not just a protein bar, it's a treat. And they're covered in 100% real chocolate. Puffs are a fan favorite to go with some of the incredible flavors, including cinnamon churro, coconut marshmallow. Sorry, I stumbled over that one. Banana cream pie. They're all so good that I can't even pronounce them. And one of them is going to be your new favorite. They're easier to eat than to say out loud. Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate, including the Puffs. 100% real chocolate, low calorie, high protein. Replace your candy bars with these and they are better. Go to built.com, scroll down to see the macros chart. You're going to be blown away. High protein, low cal, high fiber, low carb. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which has about 240 calories. They're candy bars. You know they're not good for you. But Built Bars, they'll give you the taste that you need, whether you want mint brownie, coconut almond. My personal favorite is the raspberry. And new this month, we have white chocolate cookies and cream. They're all delicious, and new flavors are coming out all the time. If they think a new flavor might be good, they'll make it. They'll make it delicious. It'll be good for you. And it's all about the taste at Built Bar. They make it delicious first and then figure out how to make it healthy. I don't know how they do it, but they pull it off every time. Go to built.com, use promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. Okay, let's take a look at this because your pal Sully went to baseballreference.com, the single greatest website in the history of the planet Earth, and I'm going to break down your team's greatest player to wear number 2 on their back. Now, I got to make this clear. I'm picking the player who, had an impact on the team, worn predominantly number 2 while playing for your team. And, some of these teams have a bunch of number 2s. Some of these teams don't. Let's go to the Diamondbacks. 14 Diamondbacks over their history of war number 2. The one with the best years wearing number 2 was slugging second baseman Aaron Hill. The Braves, surprisingly, don't have a lot of number 2s who were impact players. The one that caught my eye was a slick fielding Rafael Belliard, who was a big defensive player when the Braves won the World Series in 1995. In fact, he made a terrific play in the clinching inning against the Cleveland Indians in that World Series. Not a lot of great number 2s played for the Orioles. J.J. Hardy is probably the best one overall. Interestingly, the Red Sox have a pair of players who switched to number 2 and won a World Series. Jacoby Ellsbury switched to number 2 when the Red Sox won the 2013 World Series. His teammate on that team, Xander Bogaerts, switched to number 2 when they won the 2018 World Series. Carl Everett wore number 2 when he was acting bananas on the team. But the late Jerry Remy wore number 2 between 1978 and 84, and he's the king of all things Red Sox. Now, heading over to the Chicago Cubs, the Cubs were the greatest number 2. Hall of Famers Billy Herman and Gabby Hartnett each wore number 2 for part of their Cubs career. Tommy La Stella won it when the Cubs won it all in 2016. He was number 2. And maybe Nico Horner, who's currently on the team, will wear it with pride moving forward. Across town with the White Sox retired number 2 for Hall of Famer Nellie Fox. That's pretty cut and dry. And the same thing with the Tigers, retired number 2 for Charlie Gehringer. The Reds, interesting, the Reds don't have a lot of great number 2s in their time. Hall of Famer Ernie Lombardi briefly wore number 2 with the Reds. Nick Castellanos wore number 2 recently. During the Big Red Machine era, number 2 was worn by coach Alex Grammas, who had a big impact on the team. The team of Cleveland, whether you want to call them the Naps, the Indians, or the Guardians, not a lot of great number twos on that team either. Johnny Peralta is probably the most accomplished Cleveland player to wear number 2. 10 Rockies overall in their history have worn number 2. Troy Tolowitzki looked like he was on the verge of being the greatest Rocky of them all. Well, he had a rocky finish with injuries and kind of a bitter trade to the Toronto Blue Jays. Jonathan Daza wore the number last year. The Marlins have had a couple players wear number 2. Hanley Ramirez, one of the few players who played multiple All-Star caliber seasons with the Marlins. He played for the Marlins for 7 seasons, and he wore number 2 and had a nice career of it when they're in Miami. Not a lot of great number 2s in Houston. Chris Burke clinched the 2005 Division Series with a walk-off homer, but Alex Bregman wears number 2 now, and I think it's safe to say he's the best in franchise history to wear that number. Few short, fast infielders in Royals history wore number 2. Freddie Patek won the stolen base crown, but Alcides Escobar was the ALCS MVP in 2015 and got big hits in the World Series and helped the Royals win the 2015 World Series. So I'm going to go to Escobar. The Angels, Adam Kennedy. Remember, Adam Kennedy hit 3 home runs in the ALCS clinching game for the Angels in 2002. To this date, their only trip to the World Series. And with all the sluggers on that team's history, whether it's Reggie Jackson, whether it's Vladdy Guerrero, whether it's Mike Trout or Shohei Ohtani, it was Adam Kennedy who slugged them into the World Series. Baseball can be weird. The Dodgers, Tommy Lasorda wore number 2, got number 2 retired. No one else is going to wear number 2 in Dodger history. And there you have that. Not a lot of great number 2s in Brewers history, but Jose Valentin had a couple of really good seasons. And Nigel Morgan clinched the division series in 2011 against Arizona with a walk-off extra inning single in the 5th game. Zolo Versailles, I just butchered his name, won the MVP with the Twins and was a key player in the 1965 pennant winner. A gaggle of infielders wore number 2 for the Mets, including Jim Fregosi, who was the bounty in the horrific Nolan Ryan trade. But with the Mets' early years just so symbolized by inept play and being kind of lovable losers, Marvelous Marv Throneberry wore number 2, and maybe he's the greatest Met to wear number 2. Obviously, Derek Jeter is the greatest Yankee to wear number 2. Coach Frank Crissetti was a Yankee coach for a generation, and he wore number 2 there. That's probably one reason why a star didn't have it over the years. The A's have had a lot of great number 2s, but Tony Phillips was a really underrated player. And I think under today's standards, the late Tony Phillips would have been considered a star, especially the people who love OPS and some of the advanced metrics that Tony Phillips brought to the world champion A's in 1989. Now, Granny Hamner, have you ever heard of him? Played 11 seasons with the Phillies. Was an all-star. Was part of the 1950 National League champions. That's right. You're listening to a podcast where I bring up Granny Hamner. But you know what? He's probably the greatest number 2 in Phillies history. Jackie Hernandez was one of the 38 players to wear number 2 in Pittsburgh Pirate history and was a key contributor to the Pirates winning the 1971 World Series title. Not a lot to choose from in San Diego. Damian Jackson, maybe. Johnny Grubb. Trent Grisham, currently on the squad, has as good as any chance to be the best number 2 in Padres history. Stay healthy and keep playing good, solid center field. A pair of outstanding defensive center fielders wore number 2 for the San Francisco Giants. Brett Butler from 1988 to 1990, and his successor, Darren Lewis, who would eventually set an all-time record for errorless games by a center fielder. Randy Winn. Randy Winn had good power and was a compensation for the Mariners when they let Lou Piniella go to from Seattle to Tampa Bay. So in a way, I guess Randy Winn is the best of the 20 players in Mariners history to wear number 2. The Cardinals have Red Shandy's Hall of Famer, who did everything for the Cardinals as a player, as a coach, as a manager, won World Series on all of those fronts. And his number 2 is retired in St. Louis. With the Rays, B.J. Upton, Melvin Upton Jr., whatever you want to call him, his best years were in Tampa Bay. It was a big reason why the Rays won the ALCS against Boston in 2008. Time will tell if Yandy Diaz will be any better. The Texas Rangers, very tough one to find a great number 2. Michael Young, one of the most beloved Rangers of all time, started with number 2, but he was number 10 for most of the time, so I'm not going to count that. The pickings were slim, so I'm going to go with a slim player. It was at least a slim build, which was Otis Nixon, who stole 50 bases for the 1995 Rangers. I guess that's going to qualify. Guess what? The Blue Jays, it's going to be Aaron Hill again. He was the best Diamondback to wear number 2 and the best Blue Jay to wear number 2. He was an all-star with the Toronto Blue Jays. I mean, who else am I going to pick? I mean, Danny Ainge, the eventual Celtic superstar, played with the Blue Jays. And actually, he wore both number 2 and 22. There's a much more obvious Blue Jay to wear 22. So it was a little easier to pick that number. The Nationals, Adam Eaton wore number 2 and hit a pair of home runs in the World Series against the Houston Astros and was a key player in some of those rallies. And you know what? I'm also going to throw in the Montreal Expos because, you know what? Montreal may be getting a new team again soon. Who knows? The only one I really found was Vance Law. He was a nice player, good, solid infielder. Later became an all-star when he played for the Chicago Cubs. So there you go. Those are all the best number 2s to play in the history of baseball. And we're going to move on to number 22. But I'm going to first bring up BetOnline because football may be over the season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance, props, to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline is the number 1 spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. Not just basketball, BetOnline is your source for hockey, boxing, UFC odds, right down to Olympic coverage and information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and actions. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. And hey, I'm going to just talk a little briefly about the new podcast going on the Locked On Podcast Network. Locked On MLB Prospects. Mentioned it earlier. Host Lindsey Crosby, who came up with the idea of this show I'm doing right now, is a prospect encyclopedia. He's going deep on the Major League Baseball stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Let me scratch my nose briefly and just bring up the 22s. I brought up Kershaw. I brought up Palmer, who are the greatest 22s in baseball history. What are the other 22s around the league? There have been 11 Diamondbacks to wear number 22, and Eric Byrnes was the best player on a strange Diamondbacks team that had a negative run differential and the best record in the National League in 2007. Tip your hat to manager Bob Melvin for that achievement. A series of outfielders wore number 22 for the Braves. Jason Hayward, who came up through the Braves system, Nick Markakis, who had some wonderful seasons for them, and Jock Peterson, who helped them win the World Series last year, all wore 22 for the Braves. Clearly, Jim Palmer is the best 22 in Orioles history. Satchel Paige, by the way, briefly pitched for the St. Louis Browns, the team that eventually became the Baltimore Orioles, and he wore 22 with the Browns, at least for part of it. For the Red Sox, 36 players in Red Sox history wore 22, and most of them seem to be sluggers who made unheralded cameos with the Red Sox. Players like Mike Marshall, Sean Casey, Tony Clark, Mike Stanley, they all wore 22 for the Red Sox at one point or another. Bill Campbell was an all-star reliever for the Red Sox in the late 70s. He wore 22. But I'm going to give it to Rick Porcello, who took home a Cy Young Award in 2016 and was a key member of the pitching staff that won the World Series in 2018. He got to wear number 22. The Cubbies have had 50 players wear 22 over the years, including the completely unjustifiedly maligned Bill Buckner. He wore number 22, won a batting title, and made the All-Star team for the Cubs wearing that number. Jason Hayward won 22 when the Cubs won in 2016. But I'm going to give it to Mark Pryor, who looked like he was going to be the great savior in Cubs history. And then he was the ace of the 2003 squad. Sorry. He peaked with the Cubs and wore 22 in the process. Some memorable White Sox wore 22 with quick blink and you miss it, but impactful cameos with Chicago, like Richie Zisk, who made the All-Star team as a White Sox, same with future broadcaster Ed Farmer. Ivan Calderon and Jose Valentin had fine seasons, wear number 22, but I'm going to give it to 2005 World Series hero Scott Podsednik, who hit 0 home runs in the 2005 regular season and 2 home runs in the postseason, including a walk-off shot in Game 2 of the World Series that year. And the Reds had Dan Dreesen, who's a solid slugger, who erroneously made the Reds think that Tony Perez was expendable. He wore 22 with a big red machine. But I think you got to give, especially if you're a Reds fan who loves World Series titles, to Billy Hatcher, who's the big hitting star in the 1990 World Series against Oakland, and he wore 22. In Cleveland, whether it's the Indians or the Guardians, well, there's no Guardians on there yet. Brian Giles looked like he was going to be a budding star with the Indians in the late 90s. Juan Gonzalez had one terrific season in Cleveland, wore 22. But it's got to be Jason Kipnis, sorry, who was a foul ball away from being the ultimate baseball hero in Cleveland. He had a long foul ball that, if it didn't hook foul, would have been a walk-off home run in Game 7 of the World Series. He played for Cleveland for 9 seasons and wore 22. The Rockies had Walt Weiss wear number 22, and he was the defensive anchor of those Blake Street Bomber teams that went to the postseason in 1995. The Tigers' best 22 was Virgil Trucks, who pitched 12 of his 17 big league seasons with the Tigers and helped pitch them to the 1945 World Series title after spending most of that season fighting World War II in the Navy. The Marlins. Devon White was a key member when they won the World Series in 1997, and Brian Banks contributed to the 2003 title. But I think current Marlins pitcher Sandy Alcantara, who's an all-star and an innings eater, he's giving Miami fans a little bit of hope. The Astros. Roger Clemens won a Cy Young Award in Houston, wore 22 when he was there, and Josh Reddick was the starting right fielder for the 2017 World Series champs. Probably going to give it to Clemens just because he's Clemens. KC, the early ace of the Royals championship teams, was Dennis Leonard, who was a tremendous pitcher. And by the way, David Cohn won his lone Cy Young Award as a member of the 1994 Royals, wearing number 22. The other infielder of the 2002 Angels is the top Angel player to wear number 22, David Eckstein. He was a terrific player when they won that title. I mentioned Clayton Kershaw is the greatest Dodger of all time to wear number 22. Sorry, Franklin Stubbs, first baseman of the 1988 World Series champs. In Milwaukee, all due respect to, I mentioned Milwaukee for the other one, right? Yeah, it's right. Nigel Morgan and Jose Valentin were the best number 2s. In the best 22, sorry, Charlie Moore, it's got to go to Christian Yelich. You got an MVP and someone who has the Brewers is potentially always in the postseason. It's got to be Yelich. The Twins, best number 22 in their team history was Brad Radke, who pitched 12 seasons with the Twins and won some big games along the way. Interesting coincidence. The Mets have won the World Series twice in franchise history, and both times the World Series MVP wore number 22. Don Clendenin in 1969, Ray Knight in 1986. As for the Yankees, several pitchers won the World Series in a Yankee uniform wearing number 22. The aforementioned Roger Clemens did so. Jimmy Key did so. But Allie Reynolds was a top starter on 6, count them, 6 World Series winners. That's got to put him up here. A lot of Oakland A's wore 22 temporarily. Ricky Henderson briefly wore 22. Walt Weiss and Darrell Knowles temporarily wore it. Even future manager Tony La Russa wore it when he was a player. But I think Eric Byrnes, who was, remember, the best Diamondback to ever wear 22, he might be the best Oakland A's player to wear 22. Had a couple of very good seasons, and very well may be. The Phillies have had 51 players wear 22 over the years, and briefly one of them was Mike Schmidt, who only wanted to be the greatest Philly of all time. I'm going to say Tony Gonzalez, who was a solid player for the Phillies in the early 1960s, is probably the best of all the players to wear 22 in Philadelphia history. The Pirates have had 41 players wear 22, including Burt Blyleven, when he threw a complete game victory to clinch the 1979 pennant for the Pirates. And Andrew McCutchen powered the Pirates back into the postseason in the mid-2010s and won a National League Most Valuable Player for his troubles. As for the Padres, Xavier Nady contributed to the Padres winning the 2005 National League West title. He later joined his former manager Bruce Bochy in San Francisco, where he won a World Series ring with the Giants. Speaking of the Giants, 22 was reserved for all-star Giants in the 80s who were first basemen named Clark. Both Jack and Will Clark had the 00. Of the 17 Mariners to wear number 22, Kasazaki won the Rookie of the Year in 2000 and was the closer for Seattle's last 2 playoff squads. Jack Clark was also postseason hero with the Cardinals, wore 22 there. But David Eckstein, who was also up here with the Angels, he was a World Series MVP in 2006, and that's got to count for something. Speaking of MVPs, Matt Garza of the Rays won the 2008 ALCS MVP, pitching the Rays past the Red Sox into the World Series. So he gets the best for the Rays. For the Rangers, Richie Zisk, who I mentioned briefly with the Chicago entry, he was an all-star slugger for the Rangers in 1978. He makes the list. The Blue Jays, Jimmy Key was one of the great pitchers in Blue Jays history, winning the 2 games in the 1992 World Series, including the clincher. He's got to be there. Bringing back the Expos, Stan Bonson was a valuable reliever with a couple of good years in Montreal. And finally, Washington, Juan Soto wears number 22. He looks like he's a generational talent who already has a World Series ring on his resume. So there you go. Those are the best number 2s and 22s as we're doing here on 2-2-22. A little bit of a numbers game, a little bit of a trip down memory lane, and a little bit of me trying to figure it out because some of the choices for 2 or 22, do you know what? Were not locks. Absolutely not locks. But it is locked that I'm going to be doing this podcast as often as I can as we wait for the lockout to end. Thanks so much for making Locked On MLB your first listen every day. Make your second listen be Locked On Bets, your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. Hosted by your boy Q with expert analysis from Lee Sterling. Locked On Bets is free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Talking about the numbers 2 and 22. This has been Locked On MLB for 2-22-22. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. 22-22.